Well, good morning. Welcome to our first webinar for the year as we kick off our planter sessions looking at the topic of leadership. We're really excited for a great lineup of planter sessions this year in 2017. We've got some great ones coming up, but this morning we are looking at the topic of leadership, and it is great to have you tune in with us wherever you happen to be around Australia. Thanks for taking the time this morning to tune in. If I haven't had the chance to meet you before, my name is Gus McCowart. I've recently started working here at Geneva Push just earlier this year. Now, my job this morning is to get out of the way as quickly as possible and to hand you over to Mikey Lynch, one of Geneva Push's directors, who'll be chatting with Andrew Hurd and Matt Lehmann this morning. But before I do that, there's just a couple of housekeeping matters to let you know about. Firstly, just to make sure that you get as much out of this morning as possible, I would encourage you to submit your questions on the right-hand side in the questions toolbar. You can send those questions through at any stage this morning. If you've got them now, pop them through, or else if they come up as you're listening to the discussion, send them through. We'll make sure those get through to Mikey, and he'll be asking those to Andrew and to Matt. The next thing as well, just let you know, there's some handout documents that we'll be able to send out to you after the webinar has finished. So we'll make sure that we send those direct to your inbox, so keep an eye on that one. And finally, we also just want to thank our sponsors, EA Insurance, for their support of the planter sessions. If you haven't sorted out your insurance needs for your church, you can make sure that you chat to EA Insurance. They can meet all of your insurance needs, as well as being specialists in church insurance, in charity insurance, risk management services, and non-for-profit organisations. So thank you to EA Insurance, and make sure you jump on their website after the webinar has finished this morning. That's it from me. That's the housekeeping done. I'm going to hand you over to Mikey Lynch, who will introduce you to Matt and to Andrew and let you know a little bit more about the structure for this morning as we address the topic of leadership lessons. Give me a quick moment. I'll get out of the way. I'll hand you online to them now. And don't forget, you can ask your questions on that right-hand side toolbar. Thanks for joining us this morning and hope you enjoy.
Well, hey everyone, welcome along today, and we've got a good crowd here with us, and I hope it's helpful, worth your while. Today we're going to be looking at this question of leadership, leading yourself so that then you're in a position to lead others. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to first of all spend some time chatting with Matt Lehmann, get to know him, and I'll throw a few questions his way, and then after that we'll do the same with Andrew Hurd, and then there'll be a few extra questions with both of them. And then after that, we'll open it up for your questions. So about half an hour of me interviewing and getting some initial content, and hopefully that will stir you enough with questions that we can then go where you actually want to go for the rest of it. So the question of leading ourselves and leading others is a huge question that touches on how the mission that God has entrusted us with shapes what we say yes to and what we say no to. It affects how we work in a way that will both be sustainable over the long haul, but also as fruitful as possible for the kingdom. But it's a real battle, and I bet you everyone is feeling some sense of the fact that it's a battle for ourselves to stick with our own self-discipline, but it's also a battle with the expectations of others around us and what they want from us. It gets even worse because, of course, you change, your family changes, your ministry changes month to month, year to year, and so Matt's going to help us with some of that. Matt Lehmann serves as the senior pastor of Trinity Inner South in Adelaide, which is part of the Trinity network of churches. They've planted about 7 churches in Adelaide since 2001, and as a network they're working towards having spiritual fitness to plant a church every year. It's an awesome way of putting it. God's really blessed Inner South in the first 3 years, and they're prayerfully seeking to continually grow evangelistically sharper. And you've just taken on board a planter and are actively planning to plant in early 2018. Sounds pretty good, Matt. Thanks for coming along with us. Now, I can't hear you. My audio's gone. Now I can hear you. There you go. Hey, Matt, try again.
There we go. Someone muted, unmuted me. There we are. Thanks, Mikey.
So when you were starting out, mate, how did you decide, like in those early moments, what were you going to focus on and what were you going to leave? How did you think that through?
Well, one thing that really shaped me, I went to Multiply way back when it was in the chute and heard a great talk from Tim Sims called The Statistics Don't Lie. And it was one of those talks, I think, that really changed my ministry life. I was only in my first year of ministry, been on the ground a few months. My background was, my first degree was in management. I used to, for ANZ, analyse large companies in the workforce, just to really, you know, you're going to lend them a few $100 million. I was there to sort of analyse their plans and their ability to execute them, i.e. the bank get their money back. And I'd always been wondering sort of how much to sort of bring that management background sort of into Christian ministry. And just hearing someone like Tim Sims talk about just how pastors by nature can be very ineffective in the use of their time, and just that sort of razor-sharp idea of keeping it simple. He sort of said, you're there to make more and better disciples. There's some key tasks that need to happen each week, and there need to be some names next to that. So I found that a really helpful talk. I think it's still up on the Geneva site. I've directed many people to listen to that one. So I took a leadership team through it when we were preparing to plant. And one of the big things Tim also highlighted in that talk is that churches have, on average, 300 or 400 visitors a year, but keep less than 5% of them. And he said, you know, planting's really important. Tim's very on about planting, but he said you've got to make sure you welcome well the people that God's already bringing to you, as well as having that outward focus to take the gospel out. And of course, churches are about growing people to maturity. So I took our leadership team of 6 and we said we'll just divide it 3 ways. 2 of you are thinking about growing evangelistic culture, 2 of you are thinking about growing a really strong welcoming culture, and 2 of you are thinking about how we're growing disciples to maturity. And that sort of how we got underway, with me being sort of the only paid ministry person there. And so just sort of feeding them some different stuff, a lot of things from Geneva and different other articles, and getting people to read books to get them, those teams, thinking about all the things I was thinking as we sort of started off in a church. And probably the other thing I did was sort of say, you know, in my experience, as we've kind of learnt as a network now, you can either choose to kind of spend your time chasing up all the sort of random visitors and people you're not really sure whether they're going to join or stick, or alternatively you can spend the bulk of your time investing in people who are going to invest in others to really multiply the work. So I said to our leadership team, pastoral care, you know, me being in people's homes and things like that's not going to be a feature of our ministry. Some people will come with that expectation. This is what we're going to do, and I really want you as the leadership team to kind of take those bullets for me, because I really want to invest in people who want to invest in others. So that's a bit of a starting thought on how we kicked off.
How did what role did your the Bible teaching and preparation ministry, was it that you'd done training and preparation in the lead up to those early times, and so trusted in past preparation, or did you carve out time for those things in those early days?
No, I carved out time for a new series, and that was going to take up a reasonable chunk of my week, and that needed to be protected. So I was, by the time we planted, I was about 2 years out of Bible college. I'd had a couple of years at our mother church, and sort of thankfully kind of grown and as a preacher to a point, and just wanted to, obviously, as we all do, keep investing in that for a lifetime. But yeah, so that was obviously a feature of things that we wanted to protect in the week.
Cool. Hey, just a reminder, you might have seen it in that little window off to the side, the GoToWebinar control panel. If you've got questions, just start shooting them through, and then we'll deal with them in the second half. How, over time, have you noticed the way the challenges in terms of leading yourself and leading others, have those changed? Has your week and the way you've thought about your week had to change? You know, how's that sort of looked?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. We're coming up on our 4-year sort of birthday as a church. Yeah, as we started off, I was the sort of sole employee. My first appointment was a minister in training, so a student minister at Bible college. I think one of the key points, we started off with a large launch group of about sort of 90 on a Sunday, and then probably about 18 months in, we're up to 180, which was our sort of effectively full size of things for the building that we're in, and we decided to go to go from one 10 a.m. service to a 9 and a 10:30. But I also felt at that time I was becoming a bit of a real roadblock for good ministry happening. Like, a lot of people still wanted to run everything through me, and there were always people coming up with great ideas and having passion and energy, but if it was waiting for me to sort of get through and catch up with people. So I said, well, we want to keep growing, so we're going to now create a evangelism team first up, responsible for, you know, sharpening and overseeing that culture. Second team we started up was a welcoming integration team, and the final one was a pastoral care team, just kind of, as church grew, to make sure we were trying to grow in that evangelistic culture, so that when people came to me and said, oh, I've got a great idea for this, you know, Christmas evangelistic thing we can do with families, I'd listen to it and think, oh, that sounds great, go and speak to the evangelism team, and they'll be the ones that filter of all the great ideas what we do and don't do, which was really helpful. And then now, sort of almost four years in...
Just pause you there. I reckon that's the awesome thing that you're sort of saying there, just to kind of bounce off it a bit, is on the one hand, when you grow, and you guys started off in a place where some church planters would happy to arrive at, but then you quickly went to another place people are very, very happy to be, but to keep being restless for the sake of the mission field and not to just get comfortable. That's really awesome, to keep thinking evangelistically, but also the fact that you're saying that you don't get bigger so that you can then just get drunk with a million ideas. Like, you still got to have a discipline to go. We've got more people.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean we've just got a million bits and pieces, that we still need to stay focused.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's good, man. You've mentioned this a little bit already, but in terms of helping people understand where you were putting your time, you talked a lot about teams and working with training those who can train others. You know, it's like the Ephesians 4 that Christ gives the gifts of the teachers and leaders to equip everyone else for the works of ministry. How did you? Yeah. Yep. So you brought that up in the preaching. Are there other ways that you communicated that expectations about the model, leadership, and pastoring?
I think if you start with your leadership team, that's a good start. I thought I think of it sort of in concentric circles. The next ring out is all your Bible study leaders. You sort of think if you've got your leadership team and obviously your staff team, as well as your Bible study leaders, whenever you sort of walk into a sort of a vision night or an AGM, you've been talking with, you know, where you're going and getting feedback from, you know, 50, in our case, sort of 50 or 60 of our most kind of core people, and they're the people spending time in homes in the week in Bible studies. So it kind of, if those people are clear, they're sort of your representatives for the vision of things. And then when you stand up and say, we're going to stretch next year, we're going to take on a planter so we can plant in 2 years' time, and it's going to, you know, we're going to have to stretch financially and different things for that. There's already 50 or 60 people in the room who are totally across that, on board, have answered their questions, and can, you know, when it comes to Bible study that week and someone says, oh, you know, this seems, shouldn't we just sort of consolidate or something like that, you've actually got someone in the room who's totally across why you're doing what you're doing. I think, I still think letters are one of our best forms of communication. Emails.
Frozen there, Matt.
That we're all good. So I try and use it sparingly, but if there's something really key that we want to communicate, I sometimes we often would write maybe a page and a half letter, and then leave some space just for a personal note, and kind of print that off, mail merge it, and then, you know, spend 4 hours writing a personal note on it to different households. I think letters these days really cut through. Emails is a lot of people don't open emails. You can say things from up front. Half the people aren't there. You have to say it a number of times. Whereas a letter or a document, I think, really kind of cuts through. But you have to use it really sparingly. If you're writing letters every week, people aren't going to read them either. But, you know, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, when there's something you really clearly want to say and have everyone thinking about and praying about, I think letters can be helpful. As I sort of mentioned in passing, we're sort of about 12 months off, sort of, God willing, planting a new church. So I sort of thought, just before the year kind of really gets underway in February, just spend a 3-week sort of topical series, which we've called Churches That Plant Churches, ... And we had one on evangelism, one on discipleship, one on training, just to sort of say we're about to hit the kind of big 12-month countdown. These are the really important things we need to focus on, because that's what Churches That Plant Churches do. So there's multiple ways that you can do that. And probably another thing with our vision night we did last year, we got some good people in to kind of record it and edit it up, so that there were quite a good number of people there. But of course, half of the families have one person at home looking after the kids in bed, and not everyone can get babysitters on the same night. To record it properly and then make it available to people afterwards is a good way, again, if it's just trying to use multiple methods.
In some ways, reading between the lines as well, we're going to flip across to Andrew now, but reading between the lines, one of the things that sounds like you're doing as I'm listening in is that the experience that people would have being a part of your church would be we are together sharing in a cause and a purpose, and we're going somewhere, we're doing something, we've got values about it, rather than you are a service provider and we're coming here with expectations about how you will nurture us spiritually and care for us personally. And that's what I'm picking up there, is that sense we're coming here, rolling up the sleeves, let's go, rather than coming here going, so what do you offer and how are you going to provide it and stuff. So that sounds great.
Yep. Yeah. No,
Come back to you together along with Andrew.
Yep.
I'll move on, Matt. So Andrew has been involved in Christian ministry over 25 years. In 1996, together with his wife Kathy, established a new church on the central coast of New South Wales called Central Coast Evangelical Church, which has been shortened to EV. In 2005, he was elected the founding president of a new association of churches called FIEC. This contains churches, this bio says, in most states of Australia. Have you got all states now, Andrew?
We haven't got Adelaide, but we're coming there.
Okay, watch out. In 2009, Andrew became one of the other founding directors of Geneva Push. Married to Kathy, they have 4 grown children. Andrew, historically, as you kind of look across, say, that network of churches that you've been involved in, you reflect on you do a lot of stuff like this webinar and other things, coaching, mingling with pastors. What are some of those kind of conceptual, cultural roadblocks in people's thinking that affect the way, they think about the priorities of what the Christian minister should have?
I do it a fair bit. I'll give you at least 3. I think you've got a theology of God's sovereignty that gets in our way. I think we tend towards a kind of hyper-Calvinism that is problematic, which tends to undermine our responsibilities as leaders to think that what we do really does make a difference and we need to take care in the way we do it. So there's a theology about the sovereignty of God I think we need to work on. I think there's a theology of church that has been problematic for us, in that the way we've sometimes thought about church has meant we've not thought growth as well as we ought. And we've often put roadblocks and limiters into what church could become and how it should be. I think there's a problem with our theology of pastor. The language of pastor, I think, has absorbed all kinds of traditional notions that don't actually reflect properly what the original intention was for the person of a pastor. And that's stopped us being what we need to be to grow churches. I think there's a whole bunch of skills that we've not imbibed and embraced very well because of the way we think about pastoring ministry.
Okay, so just to go back a little bit, on each of those, what would be a kind of commonly heard catchphrase? So on the sovereignty of God, what would be the kind of catchphrase that you might hear that demonstrates the roadblock you're describing?
Well, faithfulness. We can't be held accountable for things we've got no control over, and we have no control over things outside of us. All we've got control over is inside in us, what we do, and so our responsibility is to simply be faithful. And so the whole notion of...
so what about the second one?
Say it again?
Church.
Church.
So how about the church? What's a catchphrase there that expresses that roadblock, the kind of thing you might hear from...
Yeah, we major on community and family. So church is meant to be like a family. And we use one of the metaphors of the Bible as almost an exclusive paradigm for how we think about church. So the family paradigm's one, but it's not the only, and that becomes too dominant for us.
In fact, I think I've even heard you say that actually it depends also what you imagine family to be. We often think laid-back family with 2 kids and a dog, rather than homeschool family with 11 kids, which actually looks a little bit more like a well-organised machine.
For sure.
And the third one, pastoring. What's the kind of a slogan you might hear around what the pastor ought to be that expresses that roadblock?
Intensely personal. So the language of pastor is often almost synonymous with intensely personal. And you even get one quote that I'm still in shock over, is a very wonderful Christian author, but he makes the comment that Christian ministry needs to be intensely personal. You need to know their names, you need to be in their homes to be a true pastor. I think that's not biblical, and I think it's killing our ability to grow churches.
If you want to pull Andrew up on that and interact with that more, use the question panel. You've done a fair bit of thinking about the stages of leadership, so some of the things Matt was describing from his own experience. Do you want to talk to us about some, like maybe just pick a couple of those? You know, we're a church planning network, so some of the ones a church plant might see in those first few years. And what are some of the shifts that need to happen in leading yourself and leading others? You know, just pick a couple of those size shifts.
Yeah. The classic, the two classic size shifts that operate in our kind of planting context are the movement from family church to what you might call program church. So, you know, up to 50, you're operating as a family. The pastor, you know, has a number of, you know, it's all very close, doing life on life together. The pastor's very much involved in everyone's lives. There's a few key leaders that everyone knows and looks to, and their voice is quite powerful. But it's very relational, driven across the whole network. To move from 50 into your kind of up to 150, you've got to shift into more program orientation, where the pastor might still be at the centre of things, but there's now growth is driven by a more kind of moved out from the centre programs that are led by other people who have significant, growing significant authority and responsibilities. That's your kind of, then you move into your, you know, your larger corporate kind of settings and so on. But they're your first two barriers are those 50 through to 150 setting.
And,
I think
if we could pinpoint a couple of... No, you go.
Okay,
I'll go.
Also,
the time lag is tripping us up. I'll go. Just so this is like those cars when you get met in cars and you go, oh, you're a good turn, and then you end up with a car accident. What are some of the pain points or struggle points in that? So you've described that shift from the kind of the core group in the lounge room and, you know, doing up walk-up evangelism, and the pastor's the person who even had converted, the first converts, all that kind of stuff. Letting go of that, you know, what are some of the points as we shift towards more of the program thing that the leader experiences? What are some of their pains? And what about the church experiences? So that, like, both of them have to go through a change.
Yeah, I think the biggest change is the change from being, it's been described, I think really helpfully, as the shift from shepherd to rancher. I think that's probably the big change that enables growth to happen, where the pastor as shepherd is the one he's involved in all the relationships. The key to the church life is the relationship between the pastor and the congregation member. Church grows because people see that wonderful care of the pastor to the congregation, and it's, you know, it's his ministries that very much shape it up to your kind of 150s. And I think to get much growth happening, you've got to let go of being the shepherd and become the rancher who is now someone looking after shepherds rather than doing the shepherding themselves. And that transition's very hard for most of us to do, because you've got the two problems. You've got, I don't want to let go of being the significant leader in this group of people, and they don't want to let me go as being their significant leader. And so you've got a real tussle that happens there that takes a lot of I think it takes a great deal of deep conviction about the importance of growing this church because of the lostness of people around us. Because it takes a lot of pain to get through that level.
Yeah. And it's really important, isn't it, to go, even in those early stages, what's important is not me pastoring them anyway. It's them being matured. And so if that's the thing I care about, not me maturing them, not me making a difference in people's lives, but a difference being made in people's lives, and I happen to be doing it, the more you can keep that clear, the easier you'll go, that's still happening. Like a difference is still being made in people's lives. My role has shifted.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
There's a good book. I think it's a secular book called The Leadership Pipeline, and it's a helpful book in the level of actually identifying what you've just suggested. One of the keys that a leader needs to recognise is as they shift up from being the family church pastor through to the pastoral church, through to the program church, you've got to change values almost. So at the family church level, what I value as a leader is being needed and doing ministry and having the conversations. I value that quite enormously, and it's important to me. If I'm going to move into the pastoral church and then into the program church, I've got to learn to value different things, which, just as you've said, I've got to learn to value that people get pastored rather than necessarily I be their pastor. And that is a profound shift that I've got to really almost, for most of us, we went into ministry because we love the spiritual counselling conversations. You know, I wanted to get alongside people and talk to them about their lives and help them grow and change. And to shift back from that to being someone who now just loves seeing that happen to them, whether I'm involved or not, that's a big shift.
Yeah. That's Ram Sharan, Leadership Pipeline. We'll whack any of the things that get mentioned, like that Tim Sims audio and stuff, we'll email it out to you afterwards, and so you'll get a list of things to follow up on as we go. So now let's assemble the Avengers. Matt and Andrew together, either of you can begin with this question. Things from inside or outside the church that threaten you leading well. Any additional thoughts? So we've already touched on a lot of stuff here. Anything else you want to chuck in? Internal or external threats to good leadership?
I reckon external, there's less external threats, but occasionally they do come if you're coping with a significant grief event in your family or something like that. It will diminish your capacity for a time because there's a certain amount of emotional energy and things heading out, which is when you need to be sharper than ever on what's the most important things that you do in the week. So yeah, that's probably the external one. I tend to find the battles mostly internally, not in terms of internal in the church, but internally me getting in my own way, and you know, you can slip into the sort of mindset that look after yourself physically or get good sleep or spend time with friendship and things like that, you're robbing from the church and your family and things like that. Whereas if you've got a sort of a healthy perspective on those things, enabling you to be in a good spot to be kind of more productive and more sustainable on the long term. So I tend to find the internal battles really internal, i.e. just me. So yeah, I've started with a new ministry coach this year who's been helping me think through some of that, and I've found that tremendously helpful. And yeah.
Yeah, I would I agree with all that. I would add though that there's a powerful interplay between my internal personal needs and all kinds of external dynamics. And one of them, I think, very recently has been the deep desire for a leader to be respected in the community and to have their church respected in the community. I think we get, it's subtle but very powerful pressures from the community around us to be the kind of church that they will find acceptable. And so all the social moods that sweep through our culture, worrying, we've got to be the church that worries about refugees, we've got to be the church that worries about equality, we've got to be the church that worries about gender. There's all these kind of different moods that sweep through, and it's very easy for those to subtly shape my ministry and what I'll spend time on and what I care about, and what I'll actually want to be heard to be saying. And so instead of being shaped very powerfully by the Bible and its message, I tend to pass it through the grid of what will the community find acceptable if we say. I think they're very strong impacts on us and the way we do our ministry. Yeah, it's very interesting to me. Watch church over 3-4 decades. Its message is over those decades. Its messaging is changing depending on the environment we're in. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. So unpacking that a little further, then we're saying how like those factors, and Matt commented on this as well in other ways. Our self-awareness is really important, right? So our self-awareness, both in terms of sinful desires, as well as, I mean, some of these things could well also just be like weird childhood hang-ups, daddy issues about needing for approval, or all sorts of those things, right? And that affects the way we manage leaders in our church and manage staff. That if we, part of the power that someone has over us is our own hang-ups, that kind of stuff. So any thoughts on how you can get better at self-awareness and knowing yourself and your risky reaction, your negative reactions?
Well, partly forewarned is forearmed, and I think one of the traps for us as leaders is the critique and the positive affirmation. So if a group of people want to shape me, the leader, to be what they want, there's two powerful vehicles. One is constant critique. When you say that, it really hurts people. When you say that way, it's really... So the critique, it actually does subtly impact me, but so does the positive stroke. When you said it that way, that was really wonderful. And both those things have a powerful shaping influence on me in my leadership and what I'll spend time on, what I'll say yes to, what I'll say no to. Being aware of that means that I can step back and analyse it. And I've found over the years to have friends around me who are not yes men, but are different culturally, helps me keep seeing, helps me wrestle with how much my reaction's to do with me and my background personality and how much is it to do with objective, real issues, because I get another flavour on it with someone around me. So I've tried to always gather around me, particularly men, but women as well, actually, but men who are strong-minded, who have very firm opinions, because that keeps me in check. Women who are strong-minded, who help me see different flavour and different kind of ways of seeing the world. These things are important for me.
Yeah, I think
sometimes there's a need to be combative as well. Catching that.
Sorry, Mike.
Yes, go, Matt. Sometimes a need to be combative and a hungering to always wanting to pick a fight and make a stand. Sometimes people can talk you back off those ledges to go, just walk away. Yeah.
And for us, one of the ways we've tried to approach that is trying to create a really good culture, both on our leadership and staff teams, that really values, sometimes if there's a bit of groupthink going on, or, all sort of celebrating something heading off in a direction, really values the person who's the kind of the lone voice who kind of rises up and sort of challenges sort of things. And there's been a couple of memorable times in our sort of history where we're all heading down a path one way, and maybe one of our apprentices or something like that said, I just really don't think this is the best way to do it given what we're trying to do. And so we think back fondly on those moments and kind of celebrate them and consider that a team win, and just trying to keep fostering that culture that it's okay to critique, that we're all for each other, but the mission is what we're on about. So it's a good thing to question and to critique, and sometimes be the lone voice talking you into another direction.
Yeah. I would add too, I think the other big protection mechanism, if you like, is great clarity about the vision mission. I think the clearer we are about what outcomes we're actually seeking to achieve, which is making more disciples, the clearer we are about that, the better able we are to assess every challenge, every suggested idea through the grid of that kind of mission vision. And I think clarity is one of our problems often as leadership.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask one more question that we've got on our slides here. It's going to come up now, and this is if you guys could comment on. You don't need to talk us through every single square in your Google Calendar or whatever, but describe the broad structure of your week. We might start with you, Matt. Why have you put some of the things? Maybe comment on a couple of things. Why you put them where they are.
Sure. We try and we've got 9 on our staff team. Most of those are part-timers, so we try and focus our main team times on Monday and Thursday. I find Monday a terrible day to be sort of trying to think theologically or start doing sermon prep. So we do that, and so that's our catch-ups with ministry apprentices, team meetings, working through the main sort of functions where we need to kind of keep things running and talking together. And I preserve Friday purely for sermon writing, and a few spots on Tuesday and Wednesday to do sermon prep, so that when I get to Friday I've got a clear outline and can write from there. So that's a couple of points.
Andrew?
Yeah, it's kind of getting to know yourself, and what I find different times through the day and week I'm able to do some activities better than others. And for me, the mornings tend to be where I can do fresh creative thinking. So I like to try and do my sermon prep on mornings. So I've tended to set aside, Tuesday morning, Thursday morning as sermon prep time. And just aware that Saturday night I never do sermon prep because creativity's out the window. I'm just in desperation mode, so I try and make sure I don't do it there. Afternoons I tend to be, you lose energy, you're tired, so I try and diarise meetings, because I find the interaction with a person enables me to function and keep working within limits. I find that kind of if I've had too many back-to-back meetings in an afternoon, I hit that kind of 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and I'm ready to slit my throat. I just can't. I'm done. So I've got to work out what kind of meeting.
Anymore.
That's exactly right. What did you say? So I'm come that late afternoon period. I try to be a bit more careful about the kinds of meetings I put in place. I try to only have 2 nights out in a row. I find if I have more than 2 in a row without a night at home, I'm starting again to lose the will to live, and I just start to wind down. So that's kind of a broad brushstroke.
And that is real, right? Because there comes a point where if you're worn, then you start actually not being as much use of the things you'd be at anyway, don't you? Like you could be snappy, you could be lose your relational warmth, all these sorts of things, and you go, wow, actually, if I don't manage my own emotional energy capacity, I could start actually being a destructive force.
Yeah. So I've always worked hard to put exercise into my diary, and for me, that's a stress reliever, it builds capacity, all kinds of things there. And over the years, I've tried to build into that a kind of exercise that connects me with non-Christians. So there's a few things. I was just saying, I never make decisions on Monday. I find Mondays I'm just so emotionally squashed. My personal circle is, to use that Larry Crabb language, my personal circle is so diminished. I haven't got a proper perspective on life and ministry, and everything seems worse. So I'm conscious and careful of those things.
Cool. Okay, we've got a couple of questions here, and what we might do, just so that we can get through a few, is we'll do it a bit more, whoever gets in first says something, and then if the other person go, happy to let it go, don't feel you have to add something, you know what I mean? Like, so it can just be one of you answer or the other. So the first one, we've already touched on a little, which is the expectations in the family-sized church that the pastor's available to all. I'm going to spin this question a little and ask, granted everything we've said, are there ways that you can still be kind of a little available to all? Are there little hints and tips about how to? Because I guess if you have a green room behind the stage and appear for the sermon and then disappear into the chopper straight away afterwards, that's different to sitting aisle 3, seat 4 rows back or something. So where you sit in church could be a thing like that, where you're not promising to have a cup of tea in the house, but you're available in a sense as a congregation member. And any other little hints and tips like that of ways, small ways that you can still be available and recognise that sociological thing.
I reckon combining, things that you do, having kind of multiple outcomes. So there's quite a large group of guys who fortnightly Thursday night meet for a golf round. A lot of, for me, that's a great thing to unwind it, and friendship. Sometimes we're talking about chicken wings, and other times we're talking about really key things at church, and putting on planters and things like that. So it kind of combines a lot of things, which gives you kind of reach into a number of households. Also, when other people are preaching and service leading and things, we have quite a lot of people in training doing that. It just gives you that extra time to, particularly with us with 2 services, you can hang around outside and chat a bit more and be a bit more available on a Sunday. It's a couple of points.
I always sit in the congregation, and I always stay at the end of the service. I always make sure I turn to the person next to me and talk, and then move through the group of people to allow anyone to grab me. I have known some ministers to diarise kind of a chunk of time in the week where they're available for anyone to make an appointment. I'm not sure that I've never found it possible to pull that off if I also wanted to proactively grow the work. One of the things when you do your weekly planner, I've noticed all the time is you fit in your sermon prep time, your admin meetings, finance, management, these kind of things. As soon as you put those kind of meetings in, and if you want to proactively build the work, there's very little time through the week to just have flexibility to meet anyone who wants to talk with you. So I tend to only have that on the weekend service time. That's been my experience.
I've heard you use the expression before as well, Andrew, about having a little bit of strategic unstrategicness built into your pattern, where you might do one discipleship meeting just because it's good for Christians to disciple.
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. So I ran a men's group at 1 o'clock till 3 o'clock on an afternoon for some 3 or 4 years, not because it was particularly strategic, but because I only met with half a dozen men who could make it at that time, but because it was a way of me expressing participation in normal Christian life together with others. I meet with a man at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon just to read the Bible and pray, and it's not amazingly strategic. So I've always tried to just keep little pieces of ground me and reality check. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some pastors do that with one or other of the rosters and just go, I quite like dishwashing or something. I loved it when I was at uni, so I'm happy to every now and then roll up the sleeves, and you end up then chatting with the person. So there's different ways you can do that kind of thing. But just got to keep checking that it doesn't take over, because you'll get lots of applause for it, and so there'll be that feedback loop to be dishwashing all the time. Yeah.
You've got to build into your diary, your weekly planner, proactive, build the work time, leadership pipeline development, ministry development, systems development. You've got to actually work hard to carve out good chunks of time to build the work.
Do you have any tips for leading older Christians who have as much, if not more, ministry and life experience than you? Do either of you want to give a comment on that?
We've been really blessed. We've been really blessed with an unusually large group of seniors for a church plant anyway, as per our experience in Adelaide, and they've found it's we really treasure them as a community, just with their experience. So there's lots of 20-somethings, people starting families who just love being able to chat and catch up with people 30, 40 years who've been walking very faithfully. So we often have a lot of those older Christians lead us in prayer times in church, and so the ways they pray for our community and our mission is really encouraging. They've also quite a number spent a lot of time with sort of younger people and international students wanting to check out about Christianity. So it's sort of alongside our sort of life courses, formal evangelism, there's often a lot of hospitality, sharing of life and perspective in home from a lot of our older Christians. So they're the ones that kind of really rejoice as those people become Christian and are there, with really, enjoying those baptisms and things like that. So yeah, we actively sort of portray that they're very treasured to us, and that's a true reflection. They love it, we benefit from it. So yeah.
It's worth saying, isn't it, that there is. Oh, you go, Andrew.
I would say be secure in your own leadership. When you're a young guy leading with older people around, it can be easy to be rattled. Be secure in your leadership position. Listen to them. They often want to. They've got a vast amount of experience. They want to express that they want to be heard. So listen with less critique. Just honour them in that way. Give them appropriate time, but not dominate your diary by it. I've always tried to factor in a couple of times a year a formal meeting with the older members of our church, and that's been a hugely important time for me to share my heart, vision, what's happening, hear from them, pray together. So that's been powerful.
How do you guard time with your own family, make sure they're feeling loved amongst all these other pressures of ministry? We've already touched on no more than 2 nights out. That doesn't just benefit you, but it benefits your family and your kids. Any other things like that?
There's always going to be unique pressures in ministry on families, and you can't seek to avoid cost to your family. It would be kind of wrong to do that, but I also think there should be some unique benefits and things as well. So Friday, my sermon writing day, I drop the kids to school. We've got young kids, years 2 and 4, drop them to school in the morning. I go back to the office by myself, usually write my sermon and there for pickup. So for them on that day, whilst it's been a work day, they've had Dad available from morning through to night. Friday night's often some fun time. I usually check back in. I usually do 3 or 4 hours work on Saturday night after the kids are in bed. So they've kind of felt like they've had me for a fair chunk. But over those 2 days, I've still got a reasonable amount of work done as well.
We always
party animal Saturday night.
Saturday night, that's right. We always protect dinner time. So growing up with the kids, at 5:45, I always stop work, commuted upstairs to the dining room and tried to help Kathy with the table and get the kids. And I wouldn't have a meeting until 7:45. Our meetings never started till 7:45 because I wanted to sit through dinner with the kids, no phone calls. They would often hear the phone ring when we used to have landlines. They would often hear the phone ring and I would never answer it. That was me saying to them, I won't interrupt this for anything else. Put them to bed, do your read, pray time. Holidays for us have been hugely important, so we've always worked hard to make them a good, fun family holiday.
Yep, great. Do you care personally for your staff? If so, how do you do that? And comment as well on female staff. Andrew, how's that look for you?
Yeah, do I care personally for staff? I try to, want to. I've worked hard to employ people who are self-starters, who don't need any care. But yeah, I think because my aim is to lead leaders, I've then got to invest in relationship with the leaders, who I trust then invest relationships further around the place. And I've found that the relationship with women staff is a different kind of relationship. I take greater care there. If I have a business kind of discussion with the bloke, I'll tend to be more, work through the tasks. With the girls, I'll allow things to take longer to work through more relationally and so on. There's just, and it's also bearing in mind who these, each person's different, so trying to cultivate a sense of that. We've diarised events in our calendar for the sake of relationship, meals together. We have lunch together every week as a staff, and that's important. I just want to enjoy sitting, talking, having a meal together. And we have regular, once or twice a year, big nights out where we all go out for dinner. There's a few things like that we do.
And am I right in thinking in your larger staff context, Andrew, that you would, at those lunches, not be chatting to the people you're most often in meetings with the rest of your week? So you'd be deliberately sitting and chatting with other members of staff you don't normally work with as much?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I try and move around. Yeah.
Something I really enjoy, we sort of take a high responsibility for kind of caring for each other as a team, so a lot of that happens from a team perspective, and particularly on our days like today, Thursday, we often have a short standing meeting at the start of the day, just checking on who's doing what and how we can help each other in that. I really enjoy grabbing a couple of people and just going for a walk around the suburbs and praying and before we kind of get into the day. And often if you're just sort of touching base on what's going on and spending some time in prayer, you feel like much more you're doing it together as a team rather than isolated away.
Yeah, we do want to be careful as well not to feed. You can sometimes hear people talk, rectors talk about a bishop in an Anglican setting, or team members talk about the senior pastor in a staff setting, as if there is this sort of almost paternalism. It's like I need daddy bishop or daddy senior pastor to, and if he doesn't, and if he, and it can even produce resentment then. When was the last time that, and that goes back to Andrew's comment about, we're a team of adults, self-starters, resilient people. Yes, we care for each other, but we're not, and there are responsibilities there, but it's we don't want people who are somehow expecting all the needs to be initiated and delivered by daddy pastor.
So I've tried to encourage the guys to get their own support networks beyond church, to keep nurturing their college, if they've gone through college. Not all our guys have, but their college relationships or their prior to church staff relationships, nurturing those things so that they've not got all their eggs in one basket. We've tried to encourage the wives and their relationships, though it doesn't always work. I mean, people are different, aren't they? And so you can't manufacture or make it, but you can structure to facilitate it if it will work. So that's what we've tried to do.
Yeah. Give some examples for the person who is convinced, yes, I need to build the work, set aside time for that, I've got it. I know what it looks like to set aside time to prepare a sermon. I know what activities I do that time. Well, what are the kind of activities I might do in my build the work Thursday morning? It's Thursday morning. I'm sitting down with my designer latte and my MacBook, and then what? What are some of the things I could do to build the work?
Look, one of the first steps you need to take, if a person hasn't already, is to think about what shape do I want to have to the whole ministry? What are the organisational pieces that need to be in place to facilitate growth here? And there's always, you start with your two kinds of growth. You've got numerical growth, so broad, and your maturity growth, deep. There's your two big things. What kind of structure am I going to set in place to facilitate all of that happening? So if that hasn't already happened in a leader's mind, what you do Thursday morning is start to think about that. How do I conceptualise the organisation and management of this thing, this family, to move it forward and grow? And once you start to shape that out, it's then thinking about, okay, where are the pieces that are already in place that I can work further? Where are the pieces not there at all? Where are the blockages? And I then spend time working through each of those with an action plan that comes out of it, to-do lists, and then diarise those action plans into my week.
I think too, you want to have a good sense of what's the, of all the things you could do, what's the one or two things that you're going to have a crack at, because often you can get paralysed by the number of things that you'd like to change, and then just trying to work out who's best to do it. So on our admin team, we've got someone who's great at sort of redesigning systems and things like that, so working through our sort of recruitment and rostering, and it's just setting aside time to kind of give a clear task to work on something, and then that sort of feedback coaching, yes, that sounds great, implement that, and just for trying to find people who are good at doing particular things. So this year we've got a real focus on sort of multiplying everything we do leading into planting. So we've put on someone a couple of days a week who's excellent at training and discipleship, who's just sort of started this week, and we're sort of, it's so part of that building the work idea is just sort of having a clear idea of what needs to be done, finding the right people to do it, and sort of giving them freedom and the appropriate input from senior pastor perspective.
And finding wrap up, guys. Yeah, I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap up. So before we do, I just wanted to ask if there was, because one of the things you could do in that time is read a resource that equips you better to build the work. What are some resources on the topics we've discussed today, leading yourself and leading others? Is there a book, podcast, audio that you'd recommend that hasn't already been covered?
I think something I think we need to help all our people in church think about is just how to use our time best for the kingdom. There's with families, jobs, things like that. I found one of the best books I've read on that is a book called Time for Everything by Matt Fuller. It's from the Good Book Company, and I liked it so much, and it helped me so much personally. We actually bought a copy for every household in church. I turned it into a topical sermon series. Most of our stuff's expository, but that was our sort of one topical one we'd done for a while, and yeah, that was a thought.
Yeah, look, I think you've got. I'm sorry, I've got someone coming for me. I think you've got a number of areas of development to work on. One is your own personal piety and Christian maturity as a leader, and I think Don Carson's book, Cross and Christian Ministry, is excellent for that. Then you've got personal management issues. I think 7 Habits of Highly Effective People are excellent for that. But then thirdly, you've got the issue of how do I structure church? How do I think about how this organisation is going to function? And you've got, I think you've got that, The Purpose-Driven Church by Rick Warren. You want to critique it, of course. There's problems with it, of course. But that begins to force you to think about how am I going to kind of the macro management? What's the kind of larger strategic structures I'm going to embed in this place? There's 3 books to work through.
Awesome, guys. We're out of time, so I'm going to hand back over to Gus who'll close us out. Take care.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for that, guys. Thanks for a great morning. Big thank you to Matt, to Mikey, and to Andrew for joining us this morning. It's been great to have you as well. Thank you for sending in your questions. Just a reminder that you can, we'll be sending through notes and handouts for you direct to your email, so keep an eye on your inbox after this. Just a thanks again as well to EA Insurance for their sponsorship of this morning and all of the planter sessions. We've got a great year lined up for planter sessions as well. So the next one that's coming up is with Greg Lee and with Mark Dever, and that is on the 15th of March. So jump onto the Geneva Push website after this. You can sign up for that. And that's all from us. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Thanks to the crew, for our panelists, and for Mikey, and I hope you have a great day. Talk to you later.